Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Ask Amy. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got a guest here today who is a car salesman turned attorney. He is Mehdi Cherkaoui. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Amy. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, car sales, huge in Houston. I mean, there's a car lot on every corner.
Right.
So you're sort of in a unique position. Now you represent clients who have issues with car deals, car dealerships, cars that they purchase. So we're going to go all throughout this whole episode, things people need to watch out for. But tell us a little bit about your background. So how did you decide, hey, I'm going to stop selling cars and I'm going to practice law?
So back when I was doing my four-year degree, I obviously needed to supplement my income. So I was selling cars. This was around 2004, 2005, while going to U of H full-time. And then once I graduated, I was looking for the next venture or journey in my life, and I realized that car sales was not for me. It's just that the entire environment was geared towards maximizing profits to the detriment of the consumer. And but hey, I gained a lot of experience. I honed in on my sales skills, which helped me in my litigation practice today, and learned quite a bit about how it works, the pitfalls to avoid, why dealerships do certain things that a lot of people hear about, and the purpose of them doing it, and what is it that the consumer can avoid during the car purchase transaction.
Yeah, because it's a crazy thing. I think a lot of people might get excited about buying a new car, but nobody really gets excited about the process to go to the dealership. I mean, at least that's my take and how I feel. You always feel like they're going to be trying to trick me out of money. I mean, and so you just are on guard, but then it's like, oh, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done that. When people call you, we'll talk about people who have purchased new cars and people who have purchased used cars, because you have both people calling you and there are different sets of things to look out for, right?
Correct. Well, make no mistake about it. When you walk into a dealership, it's literally a battle between you and the salesperson. It's been back before the internet era, it was even worse because the consumer was completely in the blind. They had no idea what the invoice is, the cost of certain options, so that they can at least know a point of reference, whether they're paying or overpaying or getting a good deal. Even after the internet, it's still a very unpleasant transaction because, again, it's a zero-sum game. It's whatever you can save as a consumer, the salesman doesn't make, or the dealership by extension doesn't make. So it's a constant battle between the salesman and the buyer, and that's why people, in fact, prefer to simply buy directly from the manufacturer, like Tesla has been doing successfully. It's a really easy process, convenient, because most consumers, it's not about getting the best price on the car. It's really about not overpaying in comparison to other consumers. So if everybody's paying MSRP, then it's fair for everyone, and you would see that a lot of consumers would prefer it that way. So certainly it's never a pleasant situation. The other thing that the consumer have to look into is the battle doesn't end once you agree on the price with the salesperson, or if you're buying using payments, which I completely discourage. When you're negotiating a price with a salesman, you always want to focus on the price. You're going to notice that they're always going to try to steer you back onto a payment and a term.
How much can you afford to pay each month?
Exactly. So if I can make a payment this much, or maybe extend it for this term, that's always going to be in the benefit of the dealership. You want to always go back to the price because it's all about the price, and then you can tackle the interest rate and the financing in the finance office. Preferably, you would bring your own financing, right? So you want to go to your credit union, you most likely, if not all the time, you're going to get a better interest rate unless there's a promotional rate from the manufacturer. For example, you get 0%, 0.9% for a certain term. That's something that obviously the bank or the credit union is not going to be able to match. And that's when you go with the dealership financing. Absent that, almost always, you want to get a separate source of financing like a credit union or a bank before you come into the dealership, and then you negotiate price only.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, also before you show up, you know what your payments look like because you've gone to a credit union, you've gone to a bank, they say you qualify for this amount of money. and you have all that information. So if they do offer you something, you've got something to compare it to.
That's correct. And I think there's something worth mentioning is that during the COVID era, there was a shortage, obviously, of cars, like everyone knows. Dealerships have capitalized on that for the better, probably for the past 3 years. That has changed. Do not walk into a dealership and allow a salesman to tell you that there is still a chip shortage, and that's why they have to sell the car sometimes over MSRP or at least at MSRP. That is no longer the case for the overwhelming majority of car brands. Now, I'm talking about Chevy, Cadillac, Toyota. Yeah. Now, maybe some high-end niche brands like Porsche or so, maybe there's still a shortage for 911s, et cetera. But the everyday car, the normal everyday domestic vehicle, there's plenty of inventory on the lots, and dealerships are in fact giving deep discounts to move them because the industry has been hurt by the high interest rates, and there are a lot of cars that are piling up on the lots right now. So don't be fooled. You can still get a very good discount that is similar to the pre-COVID era.
Okay. Do you think that the same holds true for used cars? Because we know that the used car market, they're so much more expensive now than they used to be because they were more in demand.
Well, again, that's the dealership trying to convince you that because used cars at some point were actually, some models were actually selling for more than what they cost brand new. Why? Because the brand new one was not available. That also has changed. CPI numbers just came back today, and I was watching the financial news, and used cars, they have held steady in terms of prices, but they have come down dramatically from the 2020, 2021 heyday when people just couldn't find a car to buy. So again, it's you're asked for a discount, you're likely to get a discount. Cars are piling up on car lots, and dealers want to move them at any cost.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So when we come back, I want to talk about these things. We definitely want to talk about pitfalls to avoid, but you sort of sprinkled in all of this information, like just good information to have if you're buying a new car or a used car. But we're going to sort of fine tune this and talk first about buying a new car. Here's what you need to know. Buying a used car. Here's what you need to know. And then we're not going to let you leave until we get 5 tips from a car salesman turned attorney.
Sounds good.
All right. So we'll be right back.
All right.
Welcome back to this episode of Ask Amy. We are here with Mehdi Cherkaoui talking to us about buying a car, whether it's a new car or a used car, and some common pitfalls that consumers fall into. We want to let's start first with buying a used car. What are the common types of complaints and things that you're hearing from customers from problems that they have after buying a used car? Probably the same things I'm hearing.
Right. So obviously with used cars, there's the mechanical component. When you buy a new car, you don't have to worry about that. Hopefully, the car is brand new, although I've heard some nightmare stories where cars that were delivered were not the very same car that a person has driven prior. Yeah, that happens, but it's rare. In a used car, so you have the issue or the mechanical component. What I suggest is obviously ask if the dealership would allow you to take your car to a trusted mechanic. Now, if you're buying a car from a franchise dealer, odds are the car has been inspected. They understand the legal liability behind selling a car that has not been inspected, that has a defect, even if it's used car. So they're likely to cover their bases and make sure the car is in good shape. But hey, there's nothing that would stop you from simply asking, can I go to my mechanic, someone you trust, maybe for a couple $100? They'll do a good inspection as to the frame, the condition of the vehicle, the mileage, and then you're comfortable at that point buying the car. So you have the mechanical component. By the way, the dealership likes to tell you that the as-is form is kind of a shield from liability in case there is an issue. I can tell you that that's not the case in a lot of instances. The as-is form basically says that the car, you buy it as is. That's the mileage. If it's inside a manufacturer warranty, then it's going to have the remaining balance of the warranty. If it's not, then it's not. But in terms of the mechanical condition, the law, specifically the Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Act, says that a dealership has the duty and the obligation to discover if there is a mechanical defect.
They need to be looking into the history of the car.
That's correct, because they're the professionals, right? You're the consumer. They do this on a daily basis. If they buy a car from an auction or take it on a trade-in, well, their duty is to inspect it before they pass it on to the consumer. If they fail to do so, their defense cannot be, well, we didn't know. We didn't know the car had frame damage. the DTPA says you as the professional ought to know, and therefore you are liable for passing on a car that has a defect onto the consumer.
Why do they do it then? Do you think car dealers do that? Buy a car at an auction, know that they haven't completely fixed it, they fixed it well enough to get it out the door. Do they do it because they believe that the consumers they're selling it to won't take that extra step, or maybe can't afford to hire an attorney?
Well, I'm not going to indict every single dealership in town.
Right.
This is just about, let's assume that it's an oversight.
Okay.
Right? They buy hundreds of cars, maybe one or two cars slip, and they don't simply inspect it, and they end up passing it on to the consumer. Now, you brought up a very good point, which is the difference between a negligent oversight and an intentional oversight. So, and that's where the jury under the DTPA, if you have enough evidence to show that this dealer intentionally concealed the defect, they knew about it, they didn't disclose it to you, the DTPA opens up the dealership to liability up to 3 times the amount of actual damages. That's kind of a punitive component to the DTPA, plus your attorney's fees are being awarded.
Wow.
That is why dealerships understand that inspecting a car is very, very important before they pass it on to the consumer. So I wouldn't say that they think that the consumer is not going to pursue them legally. I think a lot of times it's an oversight, but there's no shortage of unscrupulous dealerships that will do that intentionally, hoping that the consumer will never find out in the near future.
And even as an oversight with this as-is statement or form at the beginning, if I purchase that vehicle and they, oops, we didn't catch that, and they sold it to me as in good condition, I have recourse in terms of taking them to court.
Most of the time you do have recourse. I have to give you a legal answer, Amy. It's always, it depends, and it depends on the situation. But let's take an example let's take an example of a 2018 Toyota Corolla. Although that's not a new car, but it's not a very, very old car. So anyone that's buying a 2018 or 17 Corolla or Camry or Chevy, they expect that the vehicle is going to be at least going to have some life into it. They expect that it's not going to have frame damage. They expect that it hasn't been flooded before. And even if it had those issues, at least they would know about it, and then that would be reflected in the price of the car. So if it's a 2001 or 1997 Toyota, well, then the jury's going to probably look at it and say, well, you kind of knew what you were buying at that point because the car is 25 years old or more. There's not a set number or a set amount of years that the car has to have before the as-is becomes kind of black on white. That's it. That's what you bought. But I think again, if it's a newer used car, then the as-is form is just not going to protect the dealership if there is a major defect that the dealer should have known about, or in some instances knew about and didn't disclose it.
Let's talk about disclosures. Specifically, are there certain things that the dealer has to tell you on a used vehicle?
Well, certainly there's the odometer disclosure, right? You want to make sure that there's no rollback. That's not only a civil liability, but that's also a criminal situation. There is a lot of dealerships will give you a 24-point inspection report. You want to make sure that that's legitimate. But really,
wait, hold on. How do I make sure that's legitimate?
Well, it depends on the reputation of the dealer. So if you're buying from a franchise dealer, odds are it is legitimate. But that's when I recommended earlier, if you want to be skeptical, it is what it is. The car business is not the cleanest business in the world. You want to be skeptical. Take that car to a trusted third-party mechanic for $200 or less. They will do their own 24-point inspection, and they will verify that this car indeed what the dealership represents it to be. And I think that's the best $200 you can spend when you're buying a used car from a dealer.
And if they won't let you do that, then obviously that's a red flag.
Red flag.
You know what? There are so many car dealers right now, though, not traditional, that are becoming more the norm, that where you never even see the car until you take possession of it. And I'm speaking of Carvana. And we've seen some of the problems with these. But how do you cover yourself in those cases?
Well, their business model, the business model of Carvana, highlights their promise and their guarantee really to the consumer that the vehicle has been inspected, because what they're advertising is, look, we know that you're not able to go test drive the car or even see it in person before you buy it. So we're going to take it upon ourselves to have even a higher standard of inspection and making sure, and disclosure, and making sure that the car is not defective in any way. So to me, if you have an issue against those companies, it's actually an easier lawsuit to win if this turned into a lawsuit, because they have that heightened standard that they adopted themselves.
Right.
Because they understood that they are an online retailer and there's no way for the consumer to see the car before they buy it.
We cover this a lot, or we get this question a lot, where people say, I purchased a car, they said it was in good shape, it ran great when I did the test drive, and then 2 days later, it stopped working, or it developed, some issue comes up. What protections, if any, does the customer have on buying a used car? I mean, is there any, you said, is there a law that says in any instance that the dealer has to give you your money back?
So, we talked about the age of the car. If you're buying a 5, 6, 7, perhaps even 10-year-old car, you're paying good money for it and you're expecting it to run in the foreseeable future. 2 days after the sale, that's a no-brainer. In fact, I would suggest the consumer to look for dealerships, and there's plenty of them, that offer perhaps a 30-day warranty or even a 30-day money-back guarantee. So that covers you for that foreseeable 30 days after the sale. Sometimes you're not able to discover the defect until maybe 5-6 months pass by. I had a client call me the other day. She bought a used car from a franchise dealer, and then she didn't have to do an oil change until 5 months afterwards. It was a synthetic oil. It's not done, I think, once or twice a year.
Yeah.
So once the oil was drained from the car, the mechanic realized that this car had not had an oil change ever since it was purchased, since it was brand new. So we're talking about a car that's been running on the same oil for 5 years or 6 years.
Yikes.
You're not able to discover that until there's an oil change.
Yeah.
And there's also a discovery rule in most statutes that you can sue under. For example, the DTPA has a 2-year statute of limitations, but there's also a provision for discovery. In other words, if the defect is concealed and you as a consumer are not able to discover it until an event occurs, well, then that 2 years is extended until you actually discover the defect. Just an example, let's say you haven't had to take the car for a maintenance appointment for 2 years, and then when you did, the mechanic discovered the car had frame damage, which is one of the worst things you can have.
Right.
The law still covers you because you did not have an opportunity to discover it until the car had to go to maintenance.
Okay. All right.
So there's not a time frame where you say, well, the law gives me this many days or this many months. It's a matter of fact. It's a question of fact that the jury is going to have to determine. But certainly within 2 years is when you're able to bring a case against a dealer for a defective vehicle under the Texas DTPA.
Okay. All right. We are out of time for this segment, but I promised that when we come back, we're going to have Mehdi's 5 tips, things you should know about buying a car from a car salesman turned attorney. Of course, that's what makes it so interesting. All right. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this episode of Ask Amy. Today we're talking about all things car buying, new cars, used cars. Our expert is attorney Mehdi Cherkaoui, who used to be a car salesman. So you bring all of that experience to this. And so I asked you for 5 tips that we can all benefit from a car salesman turned attorney. The first one that you said was basically where you shop for your car.
Right. So if you have to, and I suggest that you do this all the time, try to pick a dealership with first of all, a franchise dealer. So a Ford, Chevy, Cadillac, a franchise dealer. Try to avoid the small mom and pop dealerships that are popping up all across Houston. Those dealerships likely are not going to have the reputation they seem to protect or they want to protect. Number one. Number two, if you have an issue with them, they're unlikely to come in to help and try to resolve the situation. And third, if you end up in a lawsuit against them, they may not even have enough solvency, enough assets to recover against. So And most of the time, you're not going to pay more going to a franchise dealer. That's just a misconception. And even some people are concerned about their credit. They go, well, I'm not going to go to a franchise dealer because my credit is low. I might as well go to a small dealership. That's a bad calculation. Those dealerships, both of them have the same lenders. They have access to the same lenders with the same programs. If the small dealership can finance you, rest assured the bigger dealership can finance you. And even if you have to pay a little bit more, think of that as insurance in case there is an issue. You have a big dealership to go after.
One of the tactics you talked about, and we'll be real quick, but is on some of these smaller dealerships, when they do sign a loan with somebody who has less than stellar credit, they have this device where they they make your vehicle not work when you owe money.
Right. Well, if first of all, they're going to make you think that you have the worst credit in the world, and they're doing you a favor by financing you for a car. They're going to ask for a large down payment. The interest rate is going to be astronomical. And then they're going to place a disabling device in your vehicle so that if you don't pay within 1 day of the due date, your car can be absolutely disabled and you're not able to drive to work. These are tactics that a big dealer is not going to do. So I suggest to avoid the small dealers and go to a big franchise dealer.
All right, so we're going to get through these next ones really quickly because I'm running out of time. Never buy the add-ons and the warranties.
99% of those warranties and the add-ons at a finance office are absolutely useless. And even if you want to buy them, you can go outside of the finance office and buy it for pennies on the dollar.
That said, also, you said bring your own financing.
Bring your own financing. One quick word of caution. The battle of the car sale does not end at the sales table. I guarantee you that there's a bigger battle in the finance office. You're going to have a nicely dressed so-called finance officer that's going to look out for your best interest, and that's not the case. They're going to overcharge you for warranty, overcharge you for low jack, overcharge you for the interest. So always bring your own financing. Again, unless there is a promotional interest that the manufacturer is offering the consumer, then you want to go for that 0%. Otherwise, go to your credit union or bank.
We had a viewer who emailed and said they signed all the paperwork there at the dealership and then 2 pages that were blank because the salesperson told them or the finance person said, oh, for out-of-town customers, we always do this in case something changes last minute with reference to this or that. You said, oh, bad idea to sign blank pages.
Common practice and a common mistake that the consumer makes. At any circumstance, look, the dealership wants to sell you that car just as bad as you want to buy it, sometimes even worse. So you have to be consistent. You have to be cautious. Do not sign any document that is not filled in. If it's not filled in and you know what you signed and you read what you signed, then you can sign. Otherwise, say no. And if they want to blow the deal over that, that's fine. Walk away. Most of the time, they're going to call you back and honor whatever request you had.
Sometimes when people come to us, and this is the 5th thing, and it's about the types of documents that you should be leading with, because a lot of times people will call me with a problem and maybe changes in terms of their financing. They get a call back like a week or 2 weeks later, and I say, well, what did your retail installment contract say? And they say, my what? What are documents that you should not leave that dealership without if you're purchasing a new or used vehicle?
So if you're buying a new or used vehicle and you're financing, certainly the buyer's order is going to have your information, the agreed upon price, the sales tax, etc. Then the retail installment. You want to make sure your retail installment contract is filled out, is going to have the price, the amount that you're financing, the amount of down payment that you put, the term of the loan, 60 months, 72 months, and the payment. It's going to also have any kind of penalties if if the payment is not on time. You certainly, at minimum, you want to leave with the retail installment agreement signed by you and the dealer, the buyer's order, and the odometer statement. At least you have evidence that would support what you have agreed upon should the dealership decide to call you back the next day and change the terms of the deal.
All right. Great information. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today.
Pleasure.
We're going to put contact information for you on our website in case you want to reach out to Mehdi Cherkaoui, a wealth of information. We hope you have a great day.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks.